He always pretended to be okay. The smile was on his face, but his eyes never lied. There was something deeper there, something that revealed itself only to those who knew how to see. This contradiction became almost palpable, as if his soul was silently screaming, begging to be seen, recognized, and understood. Have you ever noticed how the eyes carry truths that the mouth cannot express? It's in that invisible space that the essence reveals itself. He walked among everyone, fulfilling roles, executing routines, showing strength. But inside, something was slowly breaking, and the awareness of this created an almost irreparable fissure. The body acted on autopilot, but the gaze betrayed exhaustion. The voice said, "I'm fine," but the energetic frequency vibrated at a different pitch, lower, denser, almost perceptible to anyone brave enough to come close for real. How many times have you witnessed this in someone? How many times did you realize that internal weight couldn't be hidden, even under layers of masks? He tried to convince the world that he was whole, but the world wouldn't be fooled. There was something noticeable in his breathing, in the way he looked at the ground, in the silence that interrupted sentences midstream. And you, who have also carried pains that couldn't be spoken, might recognize this scene as a subtle mirror. It is in this contradiction that truth is born. No one can hide forever what the heart can no longer bear. He thought he could carry it all alone, but the energy of those who suffer always escapes, even in the most well-rehearsed attempts to conceal it. And it is precisely at this point that the chance for transformation arises. If this has happened to you, comment, "I needed to hear this." Because perception isn't limited to what is visible. It expands in the invisible details, in the silences loaded with meaning. He didn't speak, but each look was a scream. He didn't confess, but each absence was a confession. The paradox is this: the more he tried to hide, the more his pain became perceptible. And maybe you've experienced exactly this. The moment when someone looks into your eyes and sees everything, even when you believe you're protected behind barriers. That moment is frightening, but also liberating. Because when someone perceives, loneliness begins to dissolve. He didn't know it yet, but he was about to be seen. He was about to understand that there is no pain so hidden that it cannot be revealed by the strength of an attentive gaze. He didn't realize, but his body already carried signs that his mind refused to accept. The weight on his shoulders, the slowness of his gestures, the gaze that insisted on fleeing when someone got too close. Everything revealed what he tried to hide. It was as if the world around him conspired to unveil the secret he held within. The most curious thing was that there was nothing explicit. He spoke, smiled, greeted people, but there was a crack, a flaw almost imperceptible, noticeable only to those with sensitivity, as if each gesture carried a shadow behind it, a shadow that could not be illuminated by easy words or the rush of everyday life. He believed he was being strong. He told himself that he needed to endure, that nobody needed to know what was happening inside. But at the same time, his soul could no longer bear to be silent. And when the soul revolts, everything around begins to reflect that restlessness. The eyes, always the eyes. Doors that do not close, mirrors that do not lie. Even in laughter, there was a trace of melancholy. Even in victory, there was a sense of emptiness. And those who dared to look deeply, those who were unafraid to peel back the layers, would realize that inside there existed a silent cry. How many times have you tried to hide behind an image? How many times have you believed that if you spoke little and smiled a lot, no one would notice your pain? The truth is that there is always someone paying attention, someone who notices, even if you wish they wouldn't. And that's when it began to happen. A glance met at just the right moment, a shared silence, a presence that wasn't fooled. He wasn't ready to be revealed, but life doesn't wait for readiness. It simply unfolds. The impact of this realization was like a crack in an old wall. Small at first, almost imperceptible, but enough to make everything tremble. He realized that he could no longer escape, not from others, but from himself. Because being seen is an unavoidable mirror. When someone acknowledges your pain, you can no longer pretend it doesn't exist. And in that moment, everything changes. It's not an immediate process, nor is it comfortable. It's painful to be seen. It's uncomfortable when the truth stops being an internal secret and becomes apparent to someone else. But it's also liberating, because all of a sudden, the weight is no longer yours alone. Have you ever lived something like that? Have you ever felt that someone saw you beyond the masks? If so, you know what I'm talking about. You know what it's like to feel exposed and, at the same time, embraced. Scared and paradoxically relieved. He began to understand that he didn't have to carry everything alone. But this understanding wasn't gentle. It was like a bright light entering a dark room. Blinding at first, disorienting, yet little by little revealing. This revelation did not come in grand words. It came in the simple fact that someone stood before him without averting their gaze. Someone held the silence, and that silence was deeper than any speech. It was as if the universe was saying, "You don't have to pretend anymore." He felt fear. He felt anger. He felt the urge to run away. But at the same time, a part of him, hidden and forgotten, felt grateful. Because finally someone noticed. To notice, it's what a powerful verb. It's not just about seeing, it's about piercing through. It's about touching without contact. It's about recognizing the invisible. And that's what happened. The invisible within him was acknowledged. And here's something you might need to hear. No matter how much you hide, there will always be signs. There will always be cracks. There will always be a gaze that can see beyond. And that gaze doesn't come to judge you, but to remind you that you don't have to be alone in this struggle. If this makes sense to you so far, write yes in the comments. He continued living his routine, but now something had changed. He knew he was being seen, and that awareness began to change everything. The mask no longer fit like it used to. The weight no longer held the same way. It was as if every attempt to hide was sabotaged by his own consciousness. What was once automatic, the rehearsed smile, the quick response of "I'm fine," now sounded false even to him. And this forced him to confront the question he had always avoided. What, after all, was he carrying inside? And when this question echoes, it doesn't easily fall silent. He started to revisit memories. Each unresolved scene, every swallowed word, every pain stored in silence. Everything came to the surface in waves, as if the previously muffled unconscious now demanded space. And there was no way to stop it, because once something is perceived, it can no longer be denied. This process is painful. You know that. You might be living it right now. The old pain returns, not to destroy, but to finally be embraced. It's like a persistent visitor knocking at the door until it's let in. He resisted. He tried to close his mind, but the body reacted. Insomnia, fatigue, silences that lasted longer than they should have. The body always reveals what the mouth insists on silencing. And at some point he realized he needed to stop running away. Not because he wanted to, but because there was no other way out. Awareness had broken down the wall. Now, all that was left was to cross over. And this is where the true transformation begins, when he stops pretending for others and finally stops pretending to himself. But this doesn't happen all at once. It's a journey made up of falls, tears, silent confessions, a journey that requires courage to look in the mirror and not look away. Have you ever had that moment? The instant when the mirror forces you to face what you didn't want to. That moment can be painful, but it is also the beginning of healing, because it's only possible to heal what has been acknowledged. He started to understand this, slowly, hesitantly, but each step on this path was already a miracle in itself. He discovered, almost unintentionally, that pain doesn't disappear when ignored. On the contrary, it grows in silence, infiltrating the hidden cracks of the soul and becoming almost invisible, yet always perceptible. With every attempt to silence the heart, the wound expanded, creating roots that touched areas he believed were untouchable. Life began to show him stronger signs. Small everyday situations that had once gone unnoticed now took on new intensity. A song on the radio, a glance from a stranger, a random phrase spoken by a friend. Everything seemed to carry secret messages, as if the universe conspired to extract a confession from him. He didn't want to open up. He resisted. He created internal arguments to justify his silence. No one would understand. It's not that serious. I need to be strong. But deep down, he knew these phrases were just fragile walls. The truth is, he was scared. Scared of rejection, scared of judgment, scared of not being enough. And you know what it's like to live with that fear, don't you? It paralyzes you, but at the same time, it traps you. It keeps you in place, but it also distances you from yourself. Fear is an invisible prison, one you can only escape when someone realizes you're trapped. It was at that point that he began to understand something essential. The pain he was hiding wasn't just his own. It had already spread beyond him. The people close to him felt it, even if they didn't understand it. His silence affected entire environments. The absence of his true voice created noticeable gaps in conversations, in presences, in relationships. Because it's impossible to hide what vibrates so strongly within the soul, he started to realize that it wasn't merely a personal issue. What he was carrying influenced everything. His way of loving, of relating, of working, of existing. Pain, when denied, contaminates. And this silent contamination is one of the most destructive. At that moment, something changed. For the first time, he considered the possibility of opening up, not as someone seeking pity, but as someone finally recognizing that being alone was no longer enough. That thought was like a lightning bolt cutting through a cloudy sky, brief but illuminating. Still, it wasn't easy. With each step toward the truth, he felt a desire to retreat. With every rehearsal of confession, his throat would tighten. It was as if an invisible force was fighting to keep him anchored to the old role of strong, of unshakable. But the power of perception had already been planted, and that seed could no longer be uprooted. Can you see the power in that? A single perception can change the course of an entire life. He spent sleepless nights, not from ordinary insomnia, but because his mind could no longer silence the internal voices. Thoughts, memories, pain. Everything came in a whirlwind, and amidst this chaos, an insistent question emerged. How long? How long would he pretend? How long would he carry this burden alone? How long would he allow his eyes to reveal what his mouth denied? This question began to erode his defenses, because no matter how hard he tried to escape, there was no answer that could sustain the lie. He could no longer hide, even from himself. And then it happened, the first outpouring. Small, shy, hesitant, but real. He spoke something he had never said before. A few words, yet they carried the weight of long-held secrets. And as he spoke, he felt as if a part of that weight was ripped away from inside him. It was at that moment he understood what it means to share. It's not a weakness. It's not dependence. It's liberation. Because the pain voiced becomes bearable. The pain revealed loses the power it held when it was kept secret. Have you ever experienced this? Have you ever felt the relief of speaking something you had kept inside for years? It's almost miraculous, as if each word were a key, unlocking invisible padlocks within your chest. But the process didn't end there. Quite the opposite. Speaking once awakened in him the awareness that there was still so much more to be released. It was like opening a door and realizing there was an entire hallway of unspoken truths behind it. And thus began his deeper journey. He cried. He cried like he hadn't in years. And it wasn't a restrained cry, but a raw, primal, almost childlike one. This crying didn't bring shame. It cleansed. Each tear seemed to wash away pieces of ancient stories, dissolving memories that had held him captive. At this point, he finally understood something he had ignored for far too long. Being strong is not about pretending. Being strong is about having the courage to allow yourself to feel. This realization changed everything. He began to see life with new eyes. The same situations, but in a new light. Silence was no longer a prison, but a choice. The masks no longer served a purpose. The armor that once felt heavy now seemed useless. And then he saw. Behind all the hidden pain, there was also a calling. Life wasn't exposing him to humiliate him, but to liberate him. This calling echoed in every detail. In the gesture of someone offering their presence, in the unexpected phrase that emerged during a conversation, in the very body that could no longer bear to carry falsehoods, everything said, "It's time to stop pretending." And he began to listen. Not all at once, not perfectly, but he began. In this listening, he discovered a new kind of strength. No longer the rigid strength, but the flexible strength. No longer the hardness of someone who endures everything, but the courage to allow oneself to break in order to rebuild. This process was transforming him, little by little, silently, deeply. And maybe you are in the same process right now. Maybe you too are being called to shed the armor, to stop pretending, to allow someone to see what's inside you. If this text resonates with you, leave a heart so I know we're in this journey together. He would still face many battles. He would feel setbacks, fears, and resistance. But now there was something different. Awareness. He knew he was no longer stuck in the same place. He knew he had embarked on a point of no return, and this path was healing itself. This journey doesn't end here. If this text has moved you, the next video will turn your world upside down. Click now and continue this journey with me.